I am not your errand boy. We have no bond. You are my tool, Gavilar. Let's talk about this juicy prologue.
Juicy.
So I think Sanderson released it simply for the fact that it gives us a lot to speculate about. And it works as its own release because I believe a lot of the answers to the questions that this prologue presents will be answered in the fifth book. So if he just released it in the book, fewer people would be talking about it because they would have the answers within the same book. Sanderson likes to make it fun for the fans, and he's certainly done so here. So all this Stormfather versus Stormfaker stuff is just rich, and I had to make a video on it. So let's dive into it.
I'm so excited.
So a lot of people have proposed different theories and kept it like open, like this is maybe or could be, and then they present several theories. I am not doing that at all. I am throwing all my chips into one theory. That this is not the Stormfather in this prologue. I am full on Stormfaker theory. And more than that, I believe that I know, like, and again, I could be wrong, but I really, I'm throwing all my chips in behind I knowing who it is as well. And isn't that what your gut said when you first read through it? Did you really think your gut that that was the Stormfather? Like, what is wrong with the Stormfather? Like, I don't know how many times my mind said that. So as I read the prologue through several times, trying to view it through different types of theories and stuff, and so viewing it as if each theory was truth, and while each theory had little points here and there, only one theory alone started making connections just left and right in my brain. And I loved the implications of that theory. So let's dive into it. The theory that Ishar is the Stormfaker. So I'm certainly not the only one with this theory. Obviously, super spoiler alert, I just have to throw that out there for all the Cosmere works, right? But I do want to go through my observations with this theory as to why this is not the Stormfather and why it is Ishar. I thought of several different ways to organize this, but I finally just ended up going through the prologue chronologically and pointing out the supports for my speculations. Before I go into the prologue, though, let me give you some background to my own starting viewpoint and some theories that I already believed in before I read this prologue. And so I had a suspicion that Ishar and the Stormfather were once bonded, possibly more than one time, right? Each time that he returned from a death. Those bonds were broken each time that Ishar died and headed to Braze. Now, it's important to know that the Stormfather wasn't the same iteration at those points of time as he is now, as he has taken in a little bit more of the essence of honor and his personality or traits. We don't know exactly what the percentage or the pie chart of that is, right? But he is different now than he was when he would have bonded with Ishar. So evidences to this. Ishar was called the Binder of Gods and the founder of the Knights Radiant, and specifically the Bondsmiths. So how could he show and guide others in this capacity if he didn't have a bond himself? What god was it that Ishar bound? Well, Honor bound himself through the Oath Pact, so there's an obvious answer there. But the Stormfather is considered a god in many different lore on Roshar. And the title Ishar is plural, binder of gods, right? It could also be that they consider the Oath Pact to have bound Odium on Roshar. Anywho, there's not a lot of options. If he were actually a bondsmith, there's like 3 options, right? Stormfather, Sibling, Nightwatcher. That's it. Those are his 3 options if he was a bondsmith and he were to lead the bondsmiths. We also know very clearly, and this is proof, there's plenty of evidence in the written word that we know that the Stormfather held other bonds. Like Oathbringer chapter 119, a direct conduit to the spiritual realm, the Stormfather said. You renew spheres, Dalinar? We are connected. I was bonded to men before. This never happened then. So I find it interesting that he says men, which could just imply the race and still be one person, or it could be a plural that he was bonded to several different people. Not at the same time, just like 3 different iterations of life or whatever. Pattern also mentions to Shallan in chapter 75 of Words of Radiance that the Stormfather survived the recreance, meaning that he was bonded to somebody and then survived it when he died. Kaladin also, with the Honor Spren, kind of goes through in detail how some Honor Spren respond better than others when their knights die, and then they come back and they can take a new knight. So another evidence of the Stormfather and Ishar having a bond is that they've got this jilted lovers vibe. So chapter 64 of Oathbringer, in a discussion about Heralds, Dalinar asks the Stormfather if he knows where the Heralds are. And the Stormfather tries to do a little bit of dodgy dodge here. Dalinar lowered the honor blade, looking eastward towards the origin. Even through the stone walls, he knew that was where he would find the Stormfather. Do you know where they are? I have told you. I do not see all, only glimpses in the storms. Do you know where they are? Only one, he said with a rumble. I have seen Ishar. He curses me at night, even as he names himself a god. He seeks death, his own, perhaps that of every man. So the Stormfather tries to ignore it, brushed past it, and then we have the little ellipses, the little ... He doesn't want to tell Dalinar about his previous relationships, right? Or that there is still some lingering connection or something. How is it that he knows where Ishar is? And why is it that Ishar curses him? Right? Maybe it's because after Honor altered him with parts of his essence, the Stormfather won't take Ishar back? Girl. Finally, when Dalinar actually meets Ishar, we see this moment when Dalinar surprises Ishar by opening Honor's perpendicularity, confirming that he is bonded to the Stormfather. Here's Ishar's reaction. I see, Ishar said softly. He met Dalinar's eye, so. The enemy has corrupted the Stormfather too. I had hoped. Hoped what, Ishar? That you'd get back together?
Like, we're never getting back together. Like, ever. No!
Okay, with all that in mind, it stands to reason that if anyone could imitate the Stormfather, it would be Ishar, who was intimately connected to him for who knows how long. Right? Also, we know that there are some abilities surrounding vision giving or sharing that bondsmiths possess. Though we're unsure on what that may be, Ishar probably has this ability as well. Without further ado, let's jump into the prologue and what we learn there and how it tells us in the prologue itself that it is Ishar that we're talking about. First line we get from the Stormfather during the vision totally is in line with what we know about the Stormfather. It totally feels Stormfather-y. But the second line was already throwing my reader radar up for a loop, right? If they had been entirely truthful in their lives, the Stormfather said, then I would not be seeking their replacements. Okay, so the Stormfather does care about truthfulness, right? But when has he been seeking to replace Heralds? There's not enough evidence just from this first line to discount the Stormfather yet, but I was definitely already sussing. So the Stormfather probably would have used the word honorable or whatever rather than truthful, but more importantly, he would have evoked honor seeking his replacements rather than the strong usage of I, right? I'm the one seeking his replacements. This line makes way more sense when viewed from the lens of Ishar. Who finds replacements for things normally? The people in charge of those things. Well, who gathered the Heralds to begin with? Who formed the Oath Pact? Ishar. He would be the one seeking replacements. And more on this later in the prologue. Another compelling evidence that we are seeing Ishar here and not the Stormfather is the hauntedness with which he speaks of immortality. Right? Like, time is nothing to the Stormfather. Here's what it says in the prologue. It is not so grand as you think it to be, immortality, the Stormfather said. It wears on men and women. It weathers them and their minds. Most of the Heralds are insane now, with unnatural ailments of mind, unique to the circumstances of their ancient natures. And you are willing to accept the cost? Everyone you know will be dust by the time you return. It's with an empathy and a familiarity that the Stormfather would not have, right? Remember, he's been without a bond for a while now, and is going to be less like a human than when he's talking to Gavilar, in comparison to when he's talking to Dalinar, not more. This probably isn't enough on its own, but compounded with other things, this makes for a good evidence that we are hearing from a herald, namely Ishar. Okay, so we have interactions with Dalinar and Thydakar, and the Stormfather doesn't say much. And maybe it's a little curious, little sus, that the Stormfather sees potential in Dalinar, but I'm also thinking this is a throw by Brandon to actually make us feel like this is the Stormfather, but still doesn't make sense that the Stormfather would see potential or even care. Then here's the kicker. The Stormfather does not say a single thing, not one thought while the other heralds are there. In his relationship with Dalinar, he comes and goes, but he certainly inserts thoughts into Dalinar's head during conversations with others. In this prologue, he only speaks after Dalinar leaves, after the Seon leaves, and at the end of the conversation with Taravangian. Though, granted, Taravangian is still in the room when the Stormfaker speaks with Gavilar in his head. He is noticeably absent for any time surrounding Collect and Nail being there. So, not wanting to be recognized or discovered by your fellow heralds there, Ishar?
I see you.
Though the Stormfather, or Faker, doesn't speak during Gavilar's interaction with the heralds, we do get two clues surrounding the authenticity of our Stormfather. One from Gavilar's thoughts and one from Collect. Nail, oh storms, Gavilar knew but tried to ignore that Rastaris pretended to be a herald, as if to try to make Gavilar and others impressed. Never knowing that Gavilar himself had become familiar with the Stormfather, who had told him the truth, that the heralds had long since returned to fight on damnation. Okay, so we don't actually hear the Stormfather lie, but Gavilar says this is what was told him. So some defending this, that this is actually the Stormfather, will say that we don't actually see the lie, and that the Stormfather has done lies of omission before. And while Gavilar is clueless about a lot of things, he's not unintelligent, right? I can't see him misconstructing this one. The Stormfaker straight up lied to him. And that's not something I think the real Stormfather is even capable of, much less prone to do. Gavilar himself is surprised with this same fact later on. His conclusion is that it's not the Stormfather by asking, "What are you?" So Gavilar came to the conclusion that it wasn't the Stormfather that he was talking to. The other little clue comes when Rastaris, or Kalek, right, is talking about Ba-Ado Mishram, who deserves her own video that we might see a little bit later. And he refers to her as the one we betrayed. This implies a regret that he has about the whole affair, right? He's got these ellipses, the one we betrayed. So how is this a clue that our Stormfather is actually a Stormfaker? Well, when we look at the Stormfaker's response to this moments later when Gavilar is mulling it over. And then, ... she fell. She was too small a being, not strong enough to uphold an entire people. It all came crashing down, and some brave men and women, Radiants, did something that had to be done, trapping Mishram in a gemstone to prevent her from destroying all of Roshar. The side effect of that event created the Parshman. Notice something? Yep, the ... echoing the guilt in the exact same way that we saw it from Kalek. Not to mention the massive amount of justification and defensiveness we see in the wording here. Brave men and women doing something that had to be done. This paragraph alone should convince us that this is a Stormfaker. Though granted, it did so for me more upon reflection than it did on my first reading. The Stormfather calling these Radiants brave. The gems from Urithiru give us a vague timeline that the binding of Ba-Ado Mishram happened relatively near to the Recreants. These brave Radiants probably participated in the Recreants. How does the Stormfather feel about those humans? Oh, that's right, he and the Honorspren hated them and all mankind for killing their siblings and children. No big. Guys, this is not the Stormfather. Okay, so even when the Stormfather sees this event, the real Stormfather sees this event more clearly, referring to the Recreants, he curses Dalinar for giving him empathy to these people. He can see the future, though only cloudily. Regardless, I understand now as I never did before. The ancient Radiants didn't abandon their oaths out of pettiness. They tried to protect the world. I blame them for their weakness, their broken oaths, but I also understand. You have cursed me, human, with his capacity. Brave men and women doing what had to be done? No, he curses Dalinar for having empathy for these people, right? He still does not call these people brave. This next little detail isn't proof, but it's just so juicy when viewed from the lens of Ishar being the Stormfaker, and so that I wanted to include it anyway. This is Gavilar in his thoughts when he's a little frustrated with the Stormfather. He says, and if things did go poorly, well, could he trap the Stormfather himself in one of these? Well, we know that you could trap Ishar in one of those. which is in like the knives. So you know what I'm talking about? Just awesome irony if this is true, right? Like Gavilar going, can I trap this person? It's like, yeah, you can trap Ishar. So as Gavilar is stewing on what he's learned about Ba-Ado Mishram, he asks this beauty of a question, one that is pretty on the forefronts of our minds as readers too, right? Mishram, the unmade, Gavilar said out loud. Yes, I can see how it all played out, except the Recreants. Why would the Radiants give up such power? The Stormfather remained silent. Of course Ishar would remain silent. This is like one of his biggest mistakes, right? We don't know all that happened on Ashen, but we know that it was destroyed and that Ishar was in the middle of it all. That unchained bonds were part of a huge contributor to the destruction of Ashen. So we're led to believe that that is related to why the Radiants abandoned their bonds. And this probably represents one of Ishar's greatest failings, and if known, might prevent others from following his more current plans. So luckily for him, Gavilar moves on and doesn't press him on it. But what would Ishar say? He wouldn't want to say anything about it. And then right after that comes a line that convinced me during my first read that this is probably not the Stormfather. Right? Gavilar asks the Stormfather to watch the door, and he says, I am not your errand boy. We have no bond. Okay, so far so good. Very Stormfathery. You are my tool, Gavilar. And the text puts emphasis on my. What? Since when does the Stormfather need men for his designs and purposes? This was just it for me when I was reading. I don't really have words for why, but this just does not feel like the Stormfather to me. Prideful? Yes. Possessive of his children? Double yes. Using others as tools? Not so much, right? But he is right about one thing. Gavilar is a tool.
What a tool.
Okay, so Gavilar has interactions with Amaram, Taravangian, and Eshonai, and then finally gets some time to relax and ponder, and he and the Stormfaker get another opportunity to talk. Stormfaker totally slips. He breaks character, and Gavilar calls him out on it without even realizing it. You do not consider with reverence the position you seek, the Stormfather said. I feel you are not the one that I need, that I decided to find. You said that you were charged with this task, Gavilar said. By honor, finding someone to show the visions to prevent calamity. You didn't decide anything. You were instructed to do all of this. That is true. I do not, speak in human ways. Yeah, you're right. Because I don't talk like a human because I'm not a human. I'm the Stormfather. Yep, just the plain old Stormfather, Father of the Storm. Don't you forget it. Just a few lines later, Gavilar reveals his plan to give in and come back from Braze immediately. Stormfaker is not pleased, to say the least, but there's a little tidbit here that I think is one of the biggest clues that leads us to Ishar being the Stormfaker. The Heralds stay in damnation to keep the Voidbringers away, to prevent them from overrunning the world, to lock them and seal them away. They are the 10 fools for that, Gavilar explained. Did you catch that? Gavilar, and by proxy, Brandon, is aligning our minds, the 10 fools, with the 10 heralds. So long before this prologue, I've made that association. That's kind of the assumption that I've had, so I doubt Brandon did that on accident. I know for some that this is a pretty big limb to go out on, but I don't think it's a big stretch to say, unbeknownst to Vorin followers, the 10 heralds and the 10 fools are one and the same. I can certainly see them referring to themselves as fools for choosing the Oath Pact. Shalash particularly is known for the anti-worship, right? She totally could have led people to believe that they were fools. Whether or not the lore of the 10 fools actually stems from the heralds or not, within the context of this chapter, the fools and the heralds become aligned and synonymous, right? This then becomes a huge reveal when Gavilar asks, what are you? And the Stormfaker responds, the biggest fool of them all, or in other words, the biggest herald, binder of gods, Ishar himself. Another evidence that this is a herald is the connection that all the heralds have to each other. When Dalinar is fighting Nail, he sees the threads connecting all the other heralds to each other, and when one of the heralds dies, the Stormfaker knows it. He feels it, almost identical to the moment when Shalash feels her father die. A herald has died. No, I'm not ready. The Oath Pact. No, they mustn't see. They mustn't know. A herald dies, and his first thought is about the Oath Pact. This has got to be Ishar, guys. Let me know in the comments if I haven't convinced you yet. And he's also worried about what everyone is going to think or know or whatever. Yeah, that's not a true Stormfather thought. What does he care what men think? Okay, my last evidence that this isn't the Stormfather is the strange change in font near the end of the prologue, and I'm stoked and curious to see how Michael Kramer is going to portray this. So the whole chapter we've seen the Stormfather thoughts in italics, but when he bids Gavilar farewell, it changes, like mid-thought, to lower caps, right? "The biggest fool of them all," the Stormfather said, "and the thing that has miscalculated. Goodbye, Gavilar. I have seen a glimpse of what is coming, and I will not prevent it." I was reading this and was like, what just happened? Some people believing that it is actually the Stormfather in this prologue the whole time point to this spot as convincing them. The Stormfather has talked this way about not preventing what is coming. And this feels very Stormfathery, and I think that's because it is the Stormfather. Hence the differentiation of the font. The real Stormfather makes an appearance here to bid Gavilar farewell. Maybe because he was going to show him the visions, and Ishar kind of piggybacked on that. This would imply that the Stormfather was going to pick Gavilar and showing him in dreams during high stores, just like he did to Dalinar. Another thing that leads me to strongly believe that this is the real Stormfather here for just a second is that it says goodbye, like literally. Then the text gives us this inference of him like fading away. "Your legacy," maybe with an echo, right? Legacy. Then, just before Gavilar dies, Stormfaker comes and talks to him again in italics. Like, "You already said goodbye, dude." Or, "Did you not know that happened? Because it wasn't you." It's like, goodbye, but I'm going to stay and chat for another half hour. No, Stormfather isn't like that. That's my mom visiting with her sisters. So, our final thoughts. I am all in behind the theory that Ishar is conning Gavilar in this scene. But what is he trying to do? In that, I think he is more or less sincere. He wants to renew the Oath Pact, get a fresh line of defense. Interesting that the opposition has a fresh commander, right? Terra Vodium, right? There's lots of symmetry between the Radiants and the Singers. But I'm also thinking that he wants out, just like Kalek and all the others. And in the same passage from earlier where the Stormfather sees Ishar's, he says this: "I have told you, I do not see all, only glimpses in the storm. Do you know where they are?" "Only one," he said with a rumble. "I have seen Ishar. He curses me at night, even as he names himself a god. He seeks death, his own, perhaps that of every man."
You should have let me sleep.
Like everyone else, he's tired. I think his ultimate goal is also alluded to in the prologue in Gavilar's thoughts, when Gavilar is explaining to himself why he can't let Sadeas or Navani in on what he's doing. The Spren had hinted there was room for only one new herald. Near the beginning of the prologue, Gavilar says he had not yet asked which herald he would replace. It felt crass. Gavilar didn't ask the question, but it seems clear that Ishar probably would have eventually said in one way or another, "Me. Replace me." Folks, this is my theory of Ishar's con and Prologue Stormlight Archive 5. Please, if you like this video, give me a like, give me a subscription, and let me know what you think down in the comments. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys next time.